You're too sensitive. That phrase, or something like it. Your mum said it so many times that at some point, it stopped being her voice. It became yours. Now, every time you feel something intensely, every time an emotion washes over you, that phrase pops into your head automatically. You're too sensitive, and you shrink, you shut down, you swallow what you feel. Because you learned that feeling is wrong, that your emotions are a problem, that there's something fundamentally broken inside you. Carl Jung identified something deeply disturbing about these phrases that mums repeat. He discovered that they don't just stay in your memory, they embed themselves in your psyche, like permanent programs, and they keep running decades later. Even when your mum is no longer around. Let me tell you about Ashley. Ashley was 38 years old when she realized something that changed her life. She was in a work meeting. She had a brilliant idea. She knew it was good. She opened her mouth to speak, and she heard a voice in her head. "Who do you think you are?" The voice was so clear, so familiar, that Ashley immediately shut her mouth. She spent the rest of the meeting in silence. When she got home, she kept thinking about where that voice came from, why it appeared whenever Ashley was about to stand out, why it paralyzed Ashley in the most important moments. And then she remembered. "Who do you think you are?" It was the phrase her mum said every time Ashley showed any kind of ambition or confidence. At 7 years old, when she said she wanted to be a doctor. "Who do you think you are?" At 12, when she was selected for a gifted program. "Who do you think you are?" At 16, when she won a scholarship. "Who do you think you are? You think you deserve this." The phrase was repeated so many times that Ashley completely internalized it, and now, at 38 years old, her mom lived in another state. They barely spoke, but the voice was still there, sabotaging every moment of potential greatness. Now listen carefully, because this is essential. Jung explained that a child's psyche is like wet clay. Everything parents say leaves a mark, but some marks are deeper than others. Phrases repeated frequently, especially in moments of emotional vulnerability, aren't just heard, they are installed. The child doesn't have the ability to filter. They can't say, "That's just my mum's opinion, not the truth about me." The child simply absorbs. And what is absorbed repeatedly becomes structure. It becomes the foundation upon which identity is built. If your mom repeated for years that you were too sensitive, you didn't just hear it, you became it. Your identity was molded around that belief, and now you live as if it's true. I'm going to show you the most common phrases that narcissistic moms repeat. And as I speak, notice which one makes your stomach clench. Which one you recognize not just as a memory, but as the voice that still speaks in your head. The first phrase is, "You're too sensitive." This phrase does something devastating. It teaches the child that their emotions are a problem, that feeling deeply is a flaw, that there's a right way to feel, and you can't do it. Children who hear this repeatedly learn to distrust their own emotions. In adulthood, these people often don't know what they feel. When asked how they are doing, they get confused because they've spent their entire lives being taught that their feelings were wrong. Ashley was like that. She told me, "I don't know if what I feel is real or if I'm just exaggerating. I'm always in doubt. I always think I'm feeling too much." That's not excessive sensitivity. That's the result of a child who was taught not to trust herself. The second phrase is, "Why can't you be more like your brother, or your sister, or your cousin, or the neighbor's kid?" This phrase is particularly cruel because it does two things at once. First, it tells the child that they are not good enough as they are. Second, it shows that there's someone better, someone who can be what you can't. someone who deserves the love that you don't. Children who hear this repeatedly develop a chronic inability to feel sufficient. It doesn't matter what they conquer. It doesn't matter what they achieve. There's always someone doing better. There's always an ideal version that they can never be, and they spend their entire lives chasing an approval that never comes, because the race was programmed to never end. Ashley lived exactly in that race, at work, always comparing herself to colleagues, always thinking that others were more competent, always feeling that she was just faking knowing what she was doing. That has a name, imposter syndrome, and often it starts with that phrase, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" You learned that there's a standard that you can never reach, and now you live eternally chasing something that always moves, always one step ahead. And the worst part is that when you finally achieve it, the standard changes, because it was never about achieving. It was about keeping you moving, keeping you small, keeping you seeking approval that your mom was never going to give. The third phrase is, "After everything I've done for you." This phrase turns love into debt, turns care into obligation. It teaches the child that there's no unconditional love, that everything has a price, that they owe something for being loved, and the worst part, it teaches that they can never pay it back, because the debt is impossible to settle. People who grew up hearing this frequently become adults who can't receive. They can't accept gifts without feeling guilty. They can't receive love without expecting the bill. They can't relax in relationships because they are always calculating what they owe. Ashley had that too. When her boyfriend did something kind for her, Ashley immediately thought, what will he want in return? Not because her boyfriend was like that, but because her mom taught her that kindness always has a price. The fourth phrase is, "I know what's best for you," repeated over the years. This phrase does something subtle but devastating. It teaches the child that their own perception is not reliable, that they don't know what they want, that they need someone from the outside to tell them what's right. Adults who grew up like this often have enormous difficulty making decisions. They become paralyzed by choices. They constantly seek the opinion of others. They don't trust their own judgment, because they've been programmed to believe they don't know what's good for themselves. And that extends to everything: what clothes to wear, what food to order, what career to pursue, who to date. Everything becomes a source of anxiety, because each choice carries the weight of potentially being wrong. And if you're always wrong, better not to choose at all. Better to let someone else decide. Better to continue being the child who needs guidance, even at 30, 40, 50 years old. The dynamic doesn't change. Only who you let play the role of mum changes. It could be a controlling partner. It could be an overbearing boss. It could be a friend who always knows best. You recreate the family dynamic because it's the only one you know. And you continue outsourcing your decisions because you never learned you could trust yourself. Ashley described this with clarity. She said, "I ask everyone before deciding anything, my boyfriend, my friends, even my therapist. I can't simply choose, because what if I choose wrong? What if I choose wrong?" That fear isn't natural. It was installed by a mom who needed to control, and to control, needed to make her daughter believe she was incapable. The fifth phrase is, "You'll never amount to anything," or "You'll never succeed," sometimes stated directly, sometimes implied, sometimes just communicated through sighs of disappointment and looks of doubt. This phrase creates what Carl Jung called a failure complex. The person doesn't just expect to fail, they need to fail. Because failure confirms the narrative. Failure makes sense. Failure is familiar. Success would be terrifying. because it contradicts everything they've learned about themselves. Ashley knew this intimately. She had a clear pattern. Whenever she was about to succeed at something, something went wrong. A nearly finalized project that she'd abandon at the last minute. A promising relationship that she'd sabotage when it got serious. A promotion she wouldn't apply for even though she was the most qualified. It wasn't bad luck. It was the program running. The mom's voice saying, "You'll never succeed," and Ashley obeying. The most disturbing part is that Ashley didn't even realize she was sabotaging herself. It just seemed like circumstance. It just seemed like bad luck. It seemed like the universe was conspiring against her, but it was herself, following a script written by her mom, a script that said, "You'll never amount to anything." And Ashley lived that script every day, without knowing she could rewrite it, without knowing she could choose a different ending, without knowing that the repeated failure wasn't destiny. It was obedience. The sixth phrase is, "I do everything for you, and you're never grateful." This phrase creates chronic guilt. The child learns that no matter what they do, it will never be enough. They'll never be grateful enough. They'll never reciprocate adequately. And that guilt becomes a constant companion. People who grew up hearing this often feel guilty for existing, guilty for having needs, guilty for taking up space, guilty for simply being alive. And they spend their lives trying to compensate for a debt that never existed, because love isn't a transaction. Parental care isn't a favor. But the narcissistic mom turned everything into a business deal, and the child was eternally in debt. Carl Jung explained something crucial about the formation of what he called the shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we repress, that we hide, that we pretend doesn't exist. And much of what goes into the shadow goes because Mum said it was unacceptable. If your mum repeatedly criticized your anger, you repressed the anger, and now you can't stand up for yourself. If your mom repeatedly criticized your vanity, you repressed your pride in yourself, and now you can't celebrate your accomplishments. If your mom repeatedly criticized your desires, you repressed wanting, and now you don't know what you want from life. Each repeated phrase was a piece of you being pushed into the darkness, and now you live a reduced version of who you could be, because the most alive parts of you were exiled by your mom's voice. But wait. There's something even deeper I need to show you. Jung identified that it's not just the phrase that causes damage, it's the repetition. A phrase said once can hurt, but a phrase repeated 1,000 times becomes truth. Not objective truth, subjective truth. The truth upon which you build your identity. Think about how many times your mom said that phrase, how many years, how many different situations, how many times you heard the same words. Each repetition was like a drop of water falling on stone. One drop makes no difference, but 1,000 drops, 10,000 drops, 1,000,000 drops, sculpt a hole. And that hole is what you feel when you look at yourself and find no value, when you seek confidence and find doubt, when you try to love yourself and find your mum's voice saying you don't deserve it. Ashley told me a memory that illustrates this perfectly. She was 5 years old. She was playing dress-up with her mum's clothes. She looked in the mirror and thought she was beautiful. For a moment, just a moment, she felt what children should feel. Pure joy, admiration for herself, the simple sensation of being okay with herself. And then her mom walked into the room, looked at Ashley, and said, "You look ridiculous. Take that off right now." Ashley never played dress-up again, but more importantly, Ashley never looked in the mirror with admiration again. That single phrase, in that single moment, wouldn't be enough to cause so much damage. But it wasn't a single time. It was the first of thousands. Every time Ashley got ready to go out, her mom would comment something. "You're going out like that. That dress makes you look fat. Why don't you take better care of your appearance?" The phrases varied, but the message was always the same. You're not pretty. You're not enough. You should be ashamed of yourself. And Ashley learned to be ashamed. Even today, at 38 years old, Ashley can't receive a compliment. When someone says she looks beautiful, she immediately thinks of all the flaws, of everything that's wrong, of all the reasons why the person is mistaken. That's not humility. That's her mom's voice. Still repeating, still destroying, still controlling. You may be wondering, my mom loved me in her own way. And maybe that's true. Maybe your mom did the best she could with what she had. Maybe she herself was wounded by her own mom. Carl Jung talked about the generational transmission of traumas. The voice that your mom used with you, that was probably the voice her own mom used with her. And so it goes. Generations of women wounding women with words that seem small, but cause devastation. That explains it, but it doesn't heal it. Because explanation isn't the same as liberation. And you're not going to free yourself from your mom's voice simply by understanding where it came from. You need to do something more. Jung identified that to heal a negative mother complex, you first need to recognize the voice, identify when it appears, realize that the critical thought that comes up automatically isn't your thought. It's your mom's thought that you've internalized. This seems simple, but it's profoundly liberating, because until you make that distinction, you believe the criticism is coming from you, that it's your own assessment, that it's the truth. But when you realize, that's my mom's voice, you create space to question, to ask, is this true, or is it just what my mom believed? Ashley started doing this. Every time she heard the voice saying, "Who do you think you are?" she would stop and say to herself, "That's my mom's voice. It's not my voice, and it's not the truth." At first it felt forced, artificial, but with practice, something started to change. The voice got weaker, less automatic, less omnipresent, and in the spaces of silence that opened up, Ashley began to hear a different voice, a gentler voice, a voice that maybe had always been there, muffled by the noise of the criticism, the voice of her true self. And here, I need to warn you about something important. When you start to question your mom's voice, when you start to realize that that criticism isn't yours, something strange can happen. You might feel guilt. You might feel like you're betraying your mom. You might feel like you're ungrateful for questioning someone who raised you. That's also been programmed. A narcissistic mom installs not only the criticism, but also the protection against questioning the criticism. It's a double defense. The first layer says, "You're too sensitive." The second layer says, "If you question this, you're ungrateful." So you're stuck, accepting the criticism as truth, and feeling guilty when you try to question it. Ashley experienced this intensely when she started to realize that the critical voice was her mom's. She felt a wave of guilt, like she was doing something wrong, like she was betraying her family, like she was a bad daughter for finally seeing the truth. That guilt is part of the system, and it was installed to prevent exactly what you're doing now, realizing, questioning, breaking free. So if you feel guilt while watching this video, know that that was also put there, and you can feel the guilt and continue anyway, because programmed guilt isn't truth. It's just another form of control. But there's one more step that Jung considered essential. You need to give a voice to the part of you that was silenced. If your mom said you were too sensitive, You need to honor your sensitivity. Allow it to exist. Celebrate it as the gift that it is. Because sensitivity isn't weakness. It's the ability to feel deeply, to perceive nuances, to connect with the human experience in a way that less sensitive people can't. Your mom called it a flaw because she couldn't handle her own emotions. But the problem was never your sensitivity. It was your mom's inability to embrace it. Ashley needed to learn this, that her emotions weren't too much, that it was her mom who was too little present, too little capable, too little equipped to deal with a daughter who felt deeply. And when Ashley finally understood this, something broke free, not instantly, not completely, but a beginning. The beginning of stopping apologizing for existing. There's an exercise that Jung recommended for people who carry their mom's critical voice. He called it active dialogue. It works like this. When the voice appears, don't ignore it. Don't run away. Don't try to stifle it. Instead, respond, the voice says. You're too sensitive. You respond. My sensitivity allows me to feel life deeply, the voice says. Who do you think you are? You respond. I am someone who deserves to occupy space in this world, the voice says. You'll never succeed. You respond. I've already succeeded at many things and I will succeed at more. In the beginning, it seems ridiculous. It seems like you're talking to yourself. But what's happening is more profound than it seems. You're creating a new voice, an internal voice that defends you instead of attacking, a voice that offers support instead of criticism, a voice that can eventually replace your mum's voice. Ashley practiced this for months, and something started to change. Her mum's voice didn't disappear completely, but it got weaker. And the new voice, Ashley's voice defending Ashley, got stronger until one day, Ashley realized that the first voice that appeared in the face of a challenge was no longer her mom's. It was hers, saying, "You can do it. You who are watching this video." If you recognized your mom's voice in these words, if you realized that that internal criticism isn't yours, then you've already taken the first step. Awareness is the beginning of healing. But it's just the beginning. The journey is long because you're not just changing a thought, you're reprogramming decades of conditioning, rewriting the foundation on which your identity was built. And that takes time. If you want more people to understand how these phrases destroy, if you want this type of content to continue to exist, you can support me by clicking on the super thanks down there. Each contribution allows me to dedicate more time to researching Jung and bringing these truths that few people have the courage to speak about. And you're not just supporting me, you're helping other wounded daughters to finally understand why they feel what they feel, to finally realize that the critical voice was never theirs. Now I want to ask you something. In the comments, write the phrase that your mom repeated, the phrase that still echoes in your head. It can be anyone, one that I mentioned or one completely different, but write it. Because there is power in taking the phrase out of your head and putting it into words, in seeing it written, in realizing that other people have also heard similar phrases, that you're not alone in this experience. I read all the comments, and each shared story helps someone realize that the voice in her head isn't unique. There's a silent epidemic of mums who have destroyed their daughters' self-esteem with repeated words. And healing is possible. Before we wrap things up, I need to tell you something important. Your mom probably didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know the impact those words would have. She didn't understand that each repetition was another stone in the wall that separated you from yourself. That's not an excuse, but it is context. Because if you spend your life hating your mom, you remain tied to her. The anger is necessary. The recognition of the damage, essential. But at some point, you need to decide that her voice will no longer control your life. Not for her, for you. Because you deserve to live free from that phrase. You deserve to look in the mirror and like what you see. You deserve to feel your emotions without apologizing. You deserve to believe that you can succeed. You deserve to exist without owing anything to anyone. Ashley sent me a message months after we started working together. She said, "Today I was in a work meeting. I had an idea. I opened my mouth to speak, and I heard the voice. 'Who do you think you are?' But this time, I answered. I said to the voice, 'I am Ashley, and my idea is good.' And I spoke, and everyone agreed, and I didn't feel ashamed. That's the power of recognizing the voice and choosing not to obey it. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen. One small victory at a time, until one day, you realize that the voice is weaker, that the space between the critical thought and your response has grown larger, that you are no longer living to prove something to your mom. You're living for you. The phrase your mom repeated might have destroyed your self-esteem in childhood, but you're not a child anymore. You're no longer a hostage to that voice. You can question it. You can disobey it. You can create a new voice, a voice that says, you are enough. You are capable. You deserve it. And little by little, that new voice can become as strong as the old one. It can replace the program your mum installed. It can free you from decades of conditioning. If this video helped you understand something about your own story, subscribing to the channel helps me continue bringing this type of content. And if you know someone who also hears the critical voice of their mom in their own head, share this video, because you can't heal what you can't see. And many people spend their entire lives thinking that that cruel voice is their own voice, without knowing that it was installed by someone else, until they watch a video like this and finally realize, that voice was never mine. That voice is my mom's, and I can choose not to listen to it anymore. You are more than the phrases your mom repeated. You are more than the program that was installed in your psyche. You are more than the critical voice that still echoes in your head. You are more than the version of you that your mom saw, because your mom saw through a filter built by her own wounds, by her own limitations, by her own incapacities. And what she saw was never the real you. It was just what her filter allowed her to see. And now, finally, you can see yourself without that filter. You can discover who you really are. Not the "you're too sensitive" version. Not the "you'll never amount to anything" version. Not the "you should be more like your brother" version. But the real version. The version that exists beneath all the phrases. The version that your mom never managed to see. But that has always been there, waiting to be seen. And the proof of that is that you watch this video all the way to the end. Because some part of you knows you deserve more. Some part of you still believes that it's possible to break free. Some part of you, the truest part, never believed that phrase. It just learned to remain silent. But now, you can give a voice to that part. You can let it speak. You can let it exist. And you can discover who you really are when the voice of your mom finally falls silent.